Sizwe Nxasana is involved deeply in education. There's the Sifiso Learning Group, there is the Future Nations Schools, and then, of course, there is Ikusasa Student Financial Aid Program, a financial aid program that has got private sector support. He said earlier on in the interview the government can't carry this can all by itself. So how does Ikusasa then compare to NSFAS as to the approach and the philosophy and the focus that you can bring into a private sector initiative that you might not be able to bring into a public one?
There are particular issues that Ikusasa Student Financial Aid Program focuses on. The first one is to make sure that the country works together. In other words, the shared value proposition of bringing the private sector to work with government and institutions of higher learning to address some of the fundamental issues such as curriculum reform, such as the production of priority skills that are required in the country, such as addressing, for instance, the high dropout rates, especially those that affect the students that come from poor and working class backgrounds. And reforming the curriculum, especially in the context of the fourth industrial revolution. So if you just take, for instance, trends that are happening throughout the world today with artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, with big data, and so on, there are very different conversations that through ISFAP we're having with universities today. Because banks, for instance, say they no longer just want accountants who are trained like I was trained. Yeah. They want accountants that understand blockchain technology. They want data scientists where you combine IT with big data and analytics or statistics as degrees, and universities are responding to that. They are looking at new ways of learning and teaching. For instance, as I said earlier, the production of skills and knowledge has to go together. So even though we understand that universities are there to produce knowledge, knowledge alone is not enough in the context of the 21st century. You need the skills. You need the skills and competencies that young people must have by the time they exit the university. So ISFAP is addressing all of these issues. Obviously, to provide access, financial aid is very important. And that's why we mobilize funding from the private sector to be able to do this. And we also fill the gap where the National Student Financial Aid Scheme does not get involved. For instance, normally the general principles of the general funding of NSFAS is that you get funded for your first degree or your first certificate. Yes. And we have a lot of young people, as an example, at universities like Sivago Makato, UKZN, Walter Sisulu, and so on in Limpopo, where you have students who want to do medicine, as an example. They go and do a BSc for reasons maybe because they didn't get enough points to get into medicine. But they are funded by the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, and then they can't be funded to pursue their MBCHB, in other words, to become doctors. We pick a lot of those students up because they're not funded by NSFAS.
Can you be more selective also? You can be quite specific, say, look, we've got funding for 100 doctors this year, or 1,000 doctors, or in the technology sector we will fund this many qualifications. You can be more prescriptive.
Yeah, of course we are. So ISFAP is very prescriptive. We are very clear that, once we understand the importance of humanities degrees, as an example, even in humanities, we will not just fund people who are simply just pursuing maybe a Bachelor of Arts. We may fund a person.
We don't need too many people doing Latin poetry. I mean, nice to have poets and people who understand Latin. They're useful in small parts of the economy, but it's not what we need.
Yeah, so we are very specific. So, for instance, in humanities, we may say the country is in short supply of psychologists, child psychologists, because of some of the social problems that we have in the country. So we're very specific. We do doctors, people who study degrees that do prosthetics, for instance, engineers. But even in engineers, if you just take a lot of the engineering degrees, there are some engineering degrees that are a lot more important for where the country and where the continent or the world is going. Mechatronics, electronics, as an example, are very much more in demand as opposed to other engineering degrees that we may have had in the past. Data science is becoming a big issue. So, just suddenly you have universities, because we bring the finance and the money for research as well as of funding students, you have a situation where some universities are launching data science degrees that are in high demand today.
Where's the funding coming from? Because this stuff doesn't come cheap, and there is this bottomless need in South Africa for funding.
Yeah, so I mean, we've done the numbers. You know, we estimate that South Africa needs about 61 billion rand a year to fund students that come from families that earn between 0 and 600,000 rand. NSFAS covers the students up to 350,000 rand household income, joint household income. We pick up students right up to 600,000. But as we said earlier, obviously we focus on priority skills or occupations in high demand. Where the funding comes from, it comes mainly from companies' CSI budgets. We're working, for instance, with others to see how we mobilize a lot more funding from the broad-based Black economic empowerment, where companies can contribute towards bursaries in return for additional points, BE points. And we expect to raise up to 22 billion rand from the private sector per year to be able to supplement what the NSFAS is doing.
Is the day of going to De Beers and shaking hands with the chairman and getting the bursary over? It seems like the corporate bursary schemes are now sort of being channeled very differently into what they might have done 20 or 30 years ago. You don't get the De Beers degree and then get the job at De Beers to pay back later on.
Yeah, I'll tell you, for instance, one of the biggest trends that ISFAP is tapping funds from is impact investing. So impact investing has been around in other countries, especially the developed world, for the last 10 years or so. We're already running a pilot in one of the universities in South Africa, or where you get impact investors that are looking for particular outcomes. Like in this particular case, we in the engineering faculty of this particular university where we're running a pilot, investors or companies are putting money in to build capacity in that engineering faculty to reduce the dropout rates. And then there are companies that are going to pick up these engineers as they exit. So they're paying for outcomes as opposed to they're just throwing money and hoping for the best. So there are new ways of how you think about funding, especially social programs, and impact investing is going to be one of the biggest areas that we're going to tap into.
And this goes to the sustainability and the long-term quality of our universities. I mean, 10 years from now, are our universities still globally competitive, as many of them have been for so long?
Absolutely. You know, the Department of Science and Technology, as an example, just launched a white paper that talks about science and technology and the involvement of the private sector in what we need to do as a country to remain competitive. And ISFAP is very well placed to work with the country, with the private sector, as well as the government, to address some of the critical issues that we need to address in our country.
Yeah, but those universities, I mean, the nature of global competitiveness, you know, the UCTs and the WITSs of the world used to hold their heads up high saying they could produce globally competitive doctors, for example, globally competitive legal people, accountants, for argument's sake. Will we still maintain world leadership positions, do you think, a decade from now?
Yeah, in a fast-changing world in which we live today, that's why it's important for partners, social partners, to work together, because otherwise we're going to be left behind. So if we're not producing and responding to the needs of the economy, the needs of the world, we're producing entrepreneurs, and we're not really increasing our allocation to research and research output, we're going to be left behind. And this is what platforms such as ISFAP are addressing, to make sure that we're mobilizing the private sector, understanding that different sectors of our economy need different things, but also universities are very well placed to start specializing in some of the areas that are going to make us competitive as a country.
ISFAP, the ICUSASA Student Financial Aid Program. My thanks to Sizwe Nxasana, the former chief executive of lots of companies, now using his skills after a long career in the world, or in the professional world, to enhance the lives and skills of others. Thank you for watching Taking Stock on ENCA. More next time on this channel. Good night.